She paid for a first-class seat, so why did they ask her to leave the plane? What made the flight crew see her not as a passenger, but as a problem? And when her father arrived, why did an entire runway have to shut down just so justice could land? This is not just a story about air travel. It's about the silent rules no one admits, the glances too sharp, the voices too calm. It's about what happens when a 17-year-old black girl named Nevaeh Carter dares to stay seated, and the world expects her to vanish. But she doesn't. She holds her ground, and in the stillness of Seat 2A, she sparks a moment so powerful, it stops jets in midair and forces a global airline to answer for what it tried to hide. Why did a billionaire block a runway with his private jet? And why did the world finally stop to listen? What you're about to hear is not just a viral story. It's a story about dignity, resistance, and how staying seated can sometimes be the loudest protest of all. If this story moves you, like, share and subscribe. Now let's begin. The scent of lemon-scented disinfectant mingled with recycled cabin air, and for 17-year-old Nevaeh Carter, it was the smell of possibility, of movement, of temporary freedom. She stepped into the first-class cabin of Skyreach Airlines Flight 416 bound for Oslo and paused for a second, eyes scanning the plush leather seats and the gold-accented walls. It felt like stepping into someone else's life, someone important, someone untouchable. She clutched her worn sketchbook tighter to her chest. Seat 2A, window, the one her dad always booked for her. Nevaeh moved toward it slowly, careful not to brush against any of the suited businessmen already settling in, their watches glinting under the soft cabin lighting. She wore an oversized green hoodie with Northview School of the Arts embroidered across the chest, dark-washed jeans, and a pair of spotless white Reeboks. Her hair was in neat box braids today, pulled back in a low ponytail and accented with silver beads that clicked softly with each step she took. She set her sketchbook down gently on the armrest, adjusted the strap of her backpack, and slid into the seat. The leather was soft and cool. A small sigh left her lips. This was peace. Her father's words from this morning echoed in her mind. It's not about showing off, Solomon had told her, standing in their quiet Dallas townhouse kitchen with a cup of black coffee in one hand. It's about claiming space. You deserve a peaceful flight. Never. And I deserve to know you'll be treated the way you ought to be. He didn't say more than that. He rarely had to. Nevaeh reached into her bag and pulled out her pencil. She flipped open the sketchbook to a half-finished scene, a row of ground crew workers directing cargo carts beneath a sunset. She'd started it during last week's storm delay. She smiled a little. The world moved. Even when you were stuck, it moved. Just as she began shading the left corner of the tarmac shadows, a voice cut through the soft rustle of the cabin. "Excuse me." Miss Nevaeh looked up. The flight attendant stood at her row. A woman in her late 40s, tall and sharply dressed, with a platinum blonde bob and lipstick the color of coral. Her name tag gleamed Darla. "Yes," Nevaeh asked politely, pulling out one AirPod. Darla's gaze flicked from Nevaeh's face to the seat number, then back again. "Just a second too long. This is the first-class cabin." Nevaeh blinked. "I know. I'm in 2A." Darla's eyes narrowed slightly, the smile on her lips never quite touching her eyes. "May I see your boarding pass?" Nevaeh gestured to the printed slip tucked inside her sketchbook cover. Darla picked it up, examining it like it might be fake. Carter. Nevaeh Carter. The flight attendant read the name aloud, as if weighing each syllable. She handed it back. "Okay. Just checking. We've had issues with duplicate seats before." Nevaeh nodded, Lips pursed. Of course. Darla lingered a moment longer. You'll need to store that backpack before we taxi. Sure, Nevaeh said, reaching into the bag. I was just getting out my sketchbook. I'll stow it in the bin. Darla gave a tight nod and walked away, heels clicking on the cabin floor. Nevaeh exhaled. It wasn't the first time something like that had happened. It wouldn't be the last. Her father called them paper cuts, little wounds that no one else seemed to notice. She placed the sketchbook on her lap and closed her eyes for a moment. Don't shrink, she told herself. You don't have to shrink. A family of 4 passed by on their way to coach. A white-haired man in seat 2B beside her offered a strained smile as he took his seat. First time in first class, he asked kindly. Nevaeh gave a half-smile. No, sir. He nodded and turned back to his newspaper. The engine hum deepened as more passengers boarded. The plane smelled more like cologne and leather now. She leaned against the window, watching a fuel truck hiss vapor into the air. Her pencil moved on its own, sketching the curve of a wing beneath fading clouds. She was calm, almost, until Darla came back. Miss Carter, she said, lips pursed, I'll need to verify your seat again. There seems to be a note in the system. Nevaeh's heart skipped. A note? Yes, just procedure. May I see your pass again? Nevaeh hesitated for a beat before handing it over. Darla took it and turned away without another word. Nevaeh stared after her. The man beside her glanced up, his brows furrowing slightly. The feeling came back. That sharp burn in the chest, the heat that said something was off, deeply off. She pulled out her phone and texted her dad, Nevaeh. Something weird is happening on the plane. FA keeps checking my ticket. He replied in seconds. Solomon, stay calm. Don't argue. If she says anything more, call me. Nevaeh typed back. Nevaeh? It's probably nothing. Just feels weird. She looked toward the front of the plane. Darla was at a monitor, tapping something in. Her expression was unreadable. Nevaeh reached up to touch one of the silver beads in her braid. She used to do that when she was nervous in school. Some part of her still hoped this was a mix-up, a misunderstanding, but another part of her, older, sharper, knew. Nevaeh kept her eyes on the window, trying to anchor herself in the sky she wasn't yet flying through. The outside world remained steady. Workers in neon vests wheeled carts across the tarmac. A baggage truck reversed slowly. Nothing about their movements felt uncertain. Inside her chest, everything churned. Darla hadn't returned yet. Her boarding pass was still in the flight attendant's hands. That little slip of paper felt more symbolic now than ever before. It wasn't just a ticket. It was a right, proof of place, proof of worth. The white man beside her had resumed reading. The rustle of his newspaper was like a metronome ticking in time with her racing thoughts. What if they try to move me? What if no one says anything? She tapped her thumb against the corner of her sketchbook. The rhythm helped. She imagined her dad's voice in her ear, steady, grounded, unwavering. You belong in any room you walk into. You don't have to explain your presence. You are not an apology. She believed him. Most days. Just as her pulse was beginning to slow, Darla returned. This time, she didn't bother with a smile. Miss Carter, she said, voice low and tight. There seems to be a seat duplication issue in the system. Nevaeh blinked, but I checked in hours ago. That's my seat. I'm not saying it isn't, Darla replied, the edges of her words hardening. Just that our records show a conflict. We've reassigned you to a seat in economy. Row 32D. It's a window seat as well. The air inside Nevaeh's lungs stopped moving. Row 32. You're moving me, she asked, quietly. It's a simple switch. These things happen. Nevaeh looked down at her sketchbook, then back up at Darla. No. I'd prefer to stay here. This is my seat. I paid for it. Well, our system says otherwise. I have the receipt on my phone. Nevaeh said, pulling it up. Darla sighed. I'm not asking for proof of purchase. Miss Carter, I'm informing you of the seat change. I'll need you to gather your things now so we can remain on schedule. The businessman in 2B shifted uncomfortably. His eyes darted toward them, then away again. Nevaeh heard the quiet hush of other passengers listening. Not saying anything. Just listening. I'd like to speak to the captain or a gate agent, she said. Her voice was level but thin. Please. Darla's smile was gone now. She folded her arms. The captain is preparing for takeoff, and the gate agent is managing the back half of the manifest. I am handling this issue, and frankly, you are making it more complicated than it needs to be. Nevaeh's fingers curled tightly around her phone. I'm not trying to make anything complicated, she said, but I was seated, quietly. I'm not in anyone's way. I'm not causing any problems. Refusing to follow crew instructions is a problem, Darla snapped. Now, Miss Carter, we can do this politely, or I can call for security assistance. Security! The word detonated in Nevaeh's chest like a flare. She looked around the cabin. A few people pretended not to notice. Others stared outright. No one said a word. She remembered how her dad told her that injustice is most painful when no one else thinks it's happening. When it's wrapped in rules. When it's delivered with a clipboard and a smile. A young man across the aisle frowned, about to say something. Then he looked at Darla and quickly turned away. I'm not getting out of my seat because you feel I don't belong here, Nevaeh said, voice trembling now. This is my ticket. I didn't sneak in. I didn't lie. I just sat down. Darla took a slow breath. Ma'am, this is the last time I'll ask you. Are you going to relocate to 32D, or shall I alert the gate marshal? The final word hung in the air. Gate marshal. Nevaeh's throat burned. Her hands were shaking, her cheeks flushed, and yet there was something inside her refusing to collapse. Not this time. Not in front of this woman. Not in front of all these silent faces. She stood up, slowly. Her sketchbook remained on the seat. I'm not going to 32D, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Darla raised an eyebrow. Then I'm afraid I'll have to deboard you. Nevaeh nodded. Then I'll leave. She reached into the overhead bin for her backpack. The man in 2B flinched as if her presence was a threat, as if she might lash out or raise her voice. She did neither. She held her bag tight and began to walk past rows of wide eyes and indifferent gazes, past the business class section, past the curtain to economy, and right to the front of the aircraft. As she reached the open cabin door, Darla called out one more time, voice syrupy and fake. Thank you for your cooperation. Nevaeh didn't respond. Her feet carried her forward onto the jet bridge. She stepped out into the chilled air of the corridor and leaned against the cold metal wall, her breath coming in short, uneven bursts. Her phone buzzed, a text from her father. Solomon update. Her fingers shook as she typed, Nevaeh. She kicked me off. The reply came instantly. Solomon, where are you? Nevaeh Gate A27. Jet bridge. I left before she could call security. Solomon, stay right there. She stared at the screen, rereading the words over and over. Stay right there. Nevaeh turned to look out the narrow window beside her. The plane was still there. She could see the nose of it, the motionless boarding ramp retreating slowly. Somewhere in that aircraft, the woman who humiliated her was probably pouring ginger ale for someone in a suit. The ache in Nevaeh's chest deepened. She had done everything right. She followed every rule, sat where she was told, didn't talk back, and still. It wasn't enough. She opened her sketchbook, flipping to a blank page. Her hands trembled too much to draw. She closed it again. It wasn't about a seat. She knew that now. It never had been. It was about being seen, heard, respected. The ache twisted into something sharper. She wanted to cry. She wanted to scream. But mostly, she wanted her father. The buzz of her phone broke her trance again. "Solomon, I'm en route. You stay put. Baby girl, we're going to fix this." And somehow, just those few words eased her trembling. She slid down against the wall and sat on the floor of the jet bridge, hugging her knees to her chest. Passengers continued to file into the adjacent gate, unaware, unconcerned. Life outside kept moving. But Nevaeh knew when her father said fix, he didn't mean filing a quiet complaint. He meant the sky was about to shift. And this time, the turbulence wouldn't come from the plane. The terminal felt colder than before. Maybe it was just the sudden emptiness pressing around Nevaeh as she sat alone on the floor of gate A27, her knees pulled close, her arms wrapped tightly around them. She stared blankly through the small window set in the metal wall, her eyes fixed on the nose of Flight 416. It hadn't pushed back yet. That almost made it worse. She imagined Darla walking up and down the aisles with that fake smile, pretending everything was normal. She pictured the passengers sipping champagne, fluffing their pillows, and settling in for the long flight to Oslo. Somewhere behind the cockpit door, a calm voice was probably announcing that they'd be taking off shortly, that Skyreach appreciated their patience. Her sketchbook lay beside her, unopened. Nevaeh hadn't cried. She hadn't screamed. But she felt like she had done both on the inside. Her thoughts kept circling the same question like a drain swallowing itself. Why me? Why does it always feel like we have to prove we belong, even when the proof is right there? A gate attendant walked by, glanced down at her, then quickly looked away. He said nothing, just kept moving. That, too, was its own kind of answer. Nevaeh's phone buzzed again. "Solomon, I've just left the tarmac hangar. 10 minutes. She didn't reply. She just stared at the message and let it settle inside her chest like an anchor. Her father always told her that when people try to erase you quietly, the loudest thing you can do is stay exactly where you are. She stood up and walked over to the glass window overlooking the tarmac. The sun was dipping low over the edge of the horizon, turning the planes into silhouettes. She scanned the runways instinctively. There, a dark jet, sleek, angular, and entirely out of place in a sea of commercial white, was descending. It moved like it didn't care about anyone's schedule, like it wasn't asking for permission. Her breath caught in her throat. It was the midnight halo, her father's jet. Her fingers touched the window. It had been 2 years since she last flew on it. The inside was quiet and cool, lined with soft charcoal leather and cedar wood. The windows were slightly wider. The smell inside was always faintly like sandalwood and citrus, her dad's favorite blend. But more than anything, it felt like a place where the noise of the world couldn't touch her. And now it was landing here. The jet glided toward the runway, then made an unexpected slow turn, angling deliberately toward the center of runway 19R. Nevaeh leaned forward, eyes wide. It wasn't taxiing to a gate, it was stopping. Right in the middle of the active departure runway. Inside the control tower, alarms were no doubt going off. Nevaeh had read enough of her dad's operations manuals over the years to know what that meant. No one lands on an active runway without clearance. No one parks there unless they have a death wish or a plan. Her phone buzzed again. Solomon, they'll feel this in their bones. Down below, the jet came to a complete stop, directly blocking the path of departing planes. Its black paint gleamed under the orange glow of sunset. The stylized sea of Carter Aerospace was visible on its tail, wrapped around a silver horizon arc. A small group of runway security vehicles with flashing amber lights began to circle it from a cautious distance. No one rushed. No one dared. Nevia turned and saw people inside the terminal beginning to crowd around the windows. Pilots, gate agents. A few business travelers with carry-ons paused mid-step. Even the barista from the nearby cafe stood frozen with a half-poured latte in hand. "What the hell is going on?" someone muttered behind her. "That's a private jet," someone else replied. "But is it blocking the runway?" And in that moment, Nevia understood what her father was doing. He wasn't coming to argue. He was coming to stop everything. Within minutes, the plane door cracked open, the staircase unfolded with its usual quiet grace, and a tall figure emerged onto the tarmac. Solomon Carter didn't run. He walked, measured, intentional, impossibly calm. He wore a navy overcoat over a gray sweater, dark slacks, and his usual leather gloves. He had that same quiet fire in his eyes that made his business competitors sweat across boardrooms. But Nevia knew this wasn't about business. Not today. As her father moved toward the terminal building, the security team that had begun to approach him stopped just short of his path, almost like an honor guard. People in the terminal pressed closer to the glass. Phones came out. A few airport staff members exchanged frantic looks and began speaking into walkie-talkies. Nevia stepped back, away from the glass. Her pulse was racing. She had never seen her father look so composed and so terrifying at the same time. Minutes later, an emergency stair gate near the jet bridge was opened from the outside. A commotion of voices followed, but Nevia only heard one. "Nevia." She turned. There he was. Solomon Carter stood at the edge of the gate, surrounded by airport operations personnel, trying and failing to control the situation. His eyes locked on hers. He opened his arms. Nevia didn't think. She dropped her backpack and ran to him. He held her close, his hand at the back of her head, the scent of sandalwood grounding her in an instant. "It's okay now, baby girl," he whispered into her hair. "I'm here." For the first time since she left her seat, she let the tears come. They didn't fall like a flood. They came slow, steady, like something sacred finally being released. They stood like that for a long time. When they pulled apart, Solomon looked past her toward the cluster of officials waiting nervously nearby. "I'd like a word with the captain and the flight attendant who removed my daughter," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "Sir, with all due respect," one operations manager began, "this is a secure—" "With all due respect," Solomon interrupted gently, "you had your procedures. Now you have mine." He didn't yell, he didn't threaten, but the way he said it left no room for confusion. One of the agents motioned to a gate supervisor who quickly began making calls. Nevia wiped her eyes, stepping back beside her father. She looked out the terminal window once more. Flight 416 was still on the ground, still at the gate. And she knew without a shadow of a doubt it wasn't going anywhere until Solomon Carter said so. Captain Ethan Rhodes had been flying commercial jets for over 20 years. He had piloted through lightning storms, emergency diversions, even an engine fire once during final descent. But he had never in his life seen anything like what was unfolding on the tarmac of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. He sat motionless in the cockpit of Flight 416 headset pressed to one ear, eyes locked on the runway feed, blinking across his tablet. Every outbound plane had been grounded. The ATC tower was in controlled chaos, voices colliding over each other, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Unidentified Gulfstream G700 has landed unauthorized on runway 19R, Aircraft has stopped on active departure path, requesting status update from tower, over. The response crackled through with static, punctuated by something no captain ever wanted to hear. We're not sure what we're dealing with yet. Identity verified as Midnight Halo. Owner Solomon Carter. Ethan sat back slightly. He knew that name. Everyone in aviation did. Carter Aerospace. Defense contracts, engine patents. The man behind some of the most advanced aviation technology in use today. But what the hell was he doing blocking the most critical departure runway of the airport? And then came the news from the gate. The captain's door opened. A flight supervisor stepped in, red-faced and breathless. "Captain Rhodes," he said, "you need to come with me." Ethan stood. "What's going on? It's about the girl. The one you had removed." "I didn't remove anyone," Ethan said. "What are you talking about?" The supervisor swallowed hard. "Her name is Nevaeh Carter." Ethan blinked. Carter. The pieces began to shift into place like a slow-moving avalanche. "She was taken off this plane 30 minutes ago by one of your crew," the supervisor said. "Apparently there was a seating conflict." Who? Ethan asked sharply. Flight attendant Darla Whitmore. Of course, he should have known. Darla had a record. Nothing overt, nothing on paper that would survive scrutiny. But there were always quiet notes. Insubordination disguised as order. Discipline wrapped in professionalism. "I need her at the gate," Ethan said. "She's already there." So is Carter. And, Captain, the man landed a private jet on a live runway, without clearance. And now he's demanding a personal meeting. Then we're going to give him one, Ethan said. He walked the narrow aisle back through the first-class cabin. Darla stood near the galley, trying to compose herself. She smoothed the front of her uniform as Ethan approached. "What did you do?" he asked quietly. "I followed protocol," she replied too quickly. "There was a system conflict. I reassigned her to another seat. You deboarded her. There was a discrepancy. She had a ticket." Darla's mouth flattened. I felt she was being difficult. She refused a seat change. I asked her to comply, and she walked off the plane. "You pushed her," Ethan said. "You gave her no choice. And now her father just grounded the airport to make a point." She looked out of place. Darla muttered, the words escaping before she could filter them. Ethan's eyes narrowed. There it was, the truth, as raw as it was ugly. "You'll answer for this," he said, stepping past her. "Let's go." On the other side of the glass, Solomon stood like a statue, coat swaying lightly in the wind, hands folded calmly in front of him. Next to him stood Nevaeh, eyes clear, posture straight. She didn't look defeated. She looked like someone who had chosen the right hill to stand on. When Ethan stepped into the terminal lobby, his eyes met Solomon's. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Solomon nodded once, not with anger, but with intention. Ethan approached slowly. He saw the gate staff part like water in his path. He looked at Nevaeh. "I'm sorry," he said simply. She didn't look away. "Why didn't you come out when she removed me? I wasn't told," he admitted. "That's on me. It won't happen again." Solomon stepped forward. "Captain Rhodes," he said evenly, "I appreciate your apology, but this isn't only about you. It's about the way your airline allowed a woman in uniform to weaponize her assumptions against a young black girl." "My daughter?" "She said there was a system issue," Ethan said. Solomon's eyes hardened. No system issue justifies humiliation. No seat conflict excuses the way she was spoken to or the way she was made to feel. He took one step closer. "Do you know what it's like to watch your child be treated like a threat simply for sitting in the right seat? Do you know how many years I've spent making sure she walks into rooms with her head held high, only for someone with a lanyard and a clipboard to tell her she doesn't belong? And Do you know what happens when we accept that treatment as normal? Ethan said nothing. Solomon didn't need him to. Behind them, the terminal crowd had grown. Passengers, airport staff, even a few reporters with long camera lenses lingering near the edge of the security zone. This wasn't just a standoff anymore. It was a spectacle, a story. Darla was escorted into the circle now, her eyes darting around nervously. Solomon turned to her. "Miss Whitmore," he said slowly. "Do you remember my daughter?" Darla's voice cracked. "Yes. I didn't mean you meant exactly what you did," he replied. "You questioned her. You removed her. You threatened her with security. And you did all of that not because of a seating error, but because something in you said she didn't belong. She didn't act like a first-class passenger," Darla blurted, then immediately seemed to regret it. Nevaeh exhaled. It wasn't even surprising. Solomon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I've spent a lifetime building my daughter a runway she could walk with confidence. You tried to drag her off it, and now you will deal with the fallout." He turned to Ethan. "I want her relieved of duty. I want a written apology from Skyreach. And I want my daughter back in her seat, or this airport stays frozen." Ethan nodded slowly. "You have my word." He faced Darla. "You're relieved, effective immediately." "What?" She gasped. "You've embarrassed this crew, jeopardized this flight, and exposed this company to liability we may not recover from. Gather your things." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Then she turned and walked away without a word. Solomon finally looked back at his daughter. "Well," he said gently, "do you want to fly with me or return to your seat?" Nevaeh looked at the terminal, at the wide eyes, the cameras, the crowd. Then she looked at the plane, at seat 2A. She lifted her chin. "I want my seat back." The hum of the engines outside the terminal window was growing louder. Nevaeh pressed her palm flat against the cool glass and watched as the runway stretched out like a gray ribbon fading into the horizon. The sun was setting now, turning the sky into shades of apricot and lavender. A calm that was foreign to her settled briefly over her chest. Then the unmistakable roar of a jet broke the stillness. Nevaeh's breath hitched. She turned to see the sleek black shape of the midnight halo cutting through the sky, descending with flawless precision toward runway 19R. It wasn't just any private jet. It was her father's, Solomon Carter's personal aircraft, the one that seemed to glide on silence and shadow, the one she had once called home for a night when she needed to escape the noise of the world. Now it was descending not to land gently at a secluded hangar, but to claim something far bigger. The active departure runway of the busiest airport in Texas. People around her in the terminal stopped moving. Their conversations fell away. Phones came out. Eyes turned upward. No one spoke. The jet's wheels kissed the asphalt with a soft puff of white smoke. The powerful engines idled, humming like a low growl in the quiet evening. It was stopping, right in the center of the runway. Nevaeh's heart pounded so loud she thought the whole terminal might hear it. She squeezed her eyes shut for a moment, then opened them again. The massive glass windows framed the jet as it came to a perfect halt. Engines still running, black paint glowing under the fading light. From behind the control tower came a chorus of urgent voices and clipped commands. "Unidentified aircraft on active runway 19R. Identify and respond immediately. November 77, Tango. November, this is Dallas Tower. You are on an active runway. Clear the runway at once." The calm voice of the Midnight Halos pilot came back, steady and unyielding. "Tower, this is November 77 Tango November. We are holding position for a critical personnel issue. No immediate plans to vacate. The air traffic controller stammered, "This is a priority request from Thorn Industries. We require an urgent resolution." Nevia's jaw clenched. She knew that voice. It was Wesley Boone, her father's pilot. A former Air Force officer turned private pilot, the man who flew the Midnight Halo like a fighter jet. The terminal erupted into whispers and murmurs. Airport staff, passengers, and security personnel pressed against the windows, their faces illuminated by the glow of their phones as cameras recorded every moment. The world was watching. Nevea felt a steadying hand on her shoulder. She looked up. Solomon Carter stood tall beside her, expression unreadable but eyes blazing with fierce resolve. "They wanted to make a problem," he said quietly. "I just made it a lot bigger." The crowd outside the windows surged as a convoy of airport security vehicles approached the jet. Their flashing lights painted frantic streaks of red and blue against the dark fuselage. But the vehicles stopped short. They kept their distance. There was no doubt who they were dealing with. Solomon Carter was a man who didn't just own a private jet. He owned the runway. He owned the power to make the world stop and listen. Inside the terminal, murmurs turned to gasps. A woman whispered to her companion, "That's the billionaire Carter. He's shut down the airport." Someone else pulled out a microphone and began broadcasting live. Nevea stayed close to her father, clutching his coat. The tension wrapped around her like thick fog. The silence between them was thick, but filled with unspoken understanding. Minutes later, the rear door of the Midnight Halo slowly lowered, revealing a dark staircase. Solomon stepped onto the tarmac with slow, deliberate steps. He walked without haste or hesitation. The flashing lights of security vehicles followed him like a reluctant escort. The crowd in the terminal pressed closer to the glass, watching the man who had just brought the airport to a halt. He was walking straight toward the gate where Nevea had been forced off. Her heart swelled with a fierce pride and an aching relief. This was her father, and he was not going to let her fight alone. The airport officials hurried forward, trying to intercept him before he reached the jet bridge. "Mr. Carter, you can't be out here," one operations manager called, voice strained but attempting authority. "This is a secure area. You've shut down an entire section of the airport." Solomon stopped, turning to face the group. His voice was calm but absolute. "I am aware." He swept his gaze over the officials and the crowd of onlookers behind them. "And the north side of this airport will remain closed until my daughter receives a personal apology from the captain and the flight attendant responsible for her removal." His finger pointed steadily toward Flight 416. "Her name is Darla Whitmore. I want her escorted off that plane immediately." The police captain in charge stepped forward, attempting to regain control. "Sir, there are procedures for this kind of situation. You cannot simply land your jet on an active runway and dictate terms." Solomon's voice dropped to a low, icy edge. "Your procedures failed. Your procedures allowed a young woman to be racially profiled and publicly humiliated by your staff. My procedures are now in effect." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked on. The three airport officials exchanged stunned glances and scrambled to communicate over radios. Nevea rushed to catch up to her father. He wrapped an arm around her shoulder and drew her close. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm here. It's over." Her breath came in shaky sobs as she leaned into his steady presence. For the first time since being forced off the plane, Nevea felt safe and fiercely seen. The power of her father's love and fury had arrived on the runway like a storm, blocking the world from moving forward until justice was served. The terminal had turned into a quiet storm of hushed whispers and wide-eyed stares as Solomon Carter strode forward, his presence alone commanding the attention of everyone nearby. He was no longer just a man on a mission. He was the embodiment of unwavering resolve. The tense energy in the air was palpable, thick like fog clinging to the airport's expansive windows. Nevia walked close beside him, feeling the steady strength radiating from her father. Despite the chaotic buzz around them, she felt an unshakable calm, like she was finally standing in the place she belonged. The crowd parted respectfully as Solomon's steady steps led him toward the jet bridge, the narrow corridor connecting the terminal to Flight 416, the very plane she had been forcibly removed from. At the entrance to the jet bridge, the airport's police captain and 2 operations managers intercepted them, trying to halt the unstoppable force that was Solomon Carter. The captain, a portly man with a flushed face, cleared his throat and spoke in a tone that tried to mask the anxiety beneath his professional facade. "Mr. Carter, you cannot be out here. This is a secure area, and you have effectively shut down the entire north side of the airport." Solomon's eyes swept over the men with quiet command. His voice, low and measured, cut through the noise like a sharpened blade. "I am aware." His gaze shifted, taking in the faces of the officials and the growing crowd behind them. Then, with deliberate clarity, he delivered the ultimatum that echoed through the terminal. "The north side of this airport remains closed until my daughter receives a personal apology from both the captain of Flight 416 and the flight attendant who illegally removed her from it." He pointed directly toward the grounded airplane, the symbol of the injustice Nevia had endured. "Her name is Darla Whitmore. I want her escorted off that plane immediately." The captain swallowed hard, trying to assert his authority despite the tremor of uncertainty in his voice. "Sir, with all due respect, we have procedures. You cannot simply land your private jet on an active runway and dictate terms." Solomon's voice dropped to an icy calm. "Your procedures failed. They allowed a young woman to be racially profiled and humiliated in front of a plane full of witnesses. My procedures are now in effect." Without waiting for a reply, Solomon resumed walking. The 3 officials exchanged flustered glances, their radios crackling as they relayed orders to airport security and airline management. Nevea moved beside her father, feeling the intensity of the moment like a tide rising inside her chest. For the first time since boarding Flight 416, she was not alone, not invisible, not diminished. Solomon's hand rested lightly on her shoulder, a grounding presence that steadied her trembling limbs. "It's okay, baby girl," he murmured. "I'm here now. Nothing more will happen to you today." She leaned into his strength, her breath shaky but sure. As they approached the jet bridge door, the reality of the situation hit the crowd like a storm wave. Passengers who had watched silently began murmuring among themselves. Airport staff took out phones, capturing the extraordinary scene. Behind them, Darla Whitmore stood waiting, pale and trembling. The weight of what she had done seemed to press down on her shoulders. She avoided looking directly at Nevia or Solomon, her eyes flicking nervously around the terminal. Captain Ethan Rhodes appeared beside her, his face tight with frustration and guilt. He had been briefed on the situation by airline executives and security personnel. His anger was directed squarely at the flight attendant, his voice low but firm. "You should have told me," he said quietly. "None of this would have happened if you had just spoken up." Darla looked away, tears glistening in her eyes. Solomon stepped forward, his gaze locking on Darla with a sharpness that left no room for evasion. "Are you Darla Whitmore?" She nodded silently, unable to speak. "My daughter was a confirmed, ticketed first-class passenger on this flight," Solomon said, voice firm. "You questioned her repeatedly. You demanded to see her boarding pass more times than protocol requires. Then, without cause, you invented a seating conflict and removed her from the plane. You threatened her with security. Is that an accurate account of your actions? Darla opened her mouth, then closed it again. She looked helplessly toward Captain Rhodes, who offered no support. There was a discrepancy in the system. She stammered, her voice weak. Discrepancy, Solomon repeated slowly, a humorless smile touching his lips. That's a creative word for prejudice. Let's call it what it is. His voice softened but carried a weight that seemed to fill the entire terminal. You saw a young black woman in a hoodie sitting in a seat you thought she didn't belong in. You exercised your authority as you saw fit. He turned to Nevaeh, pride shining in his eyes. My daughter is an honor student. She is a gifted artist. She is kind, respectful, and quiet. She was on her way to visit family, and you treated her like a criminal. The officials around them were silent now, the truth of Solomon's words hanging heavily in the air. Turning back to Captain Rhodes, Solomon said, Your crew is your command. You bear responsibility for the grievous error that led to this. Captain Rhodes met Solomon's gaze without flinching. You are right. I am responsible, and I am deeply sorry. It never should have happened. Then, with a decisiveness that stunned everyone present, he turned to Darla. Darla Whitmore, you are relieved of your duties effective immediately. An escort will meet you at the terminal exit. Darla's face crumpled as the weight of her actions finally broke through her defenses. I can't, she began, but Rhodes cut her off. Yes, you can. Now go. She turned and walked away, shoulders slumped in defeat. Solomon looked back at his daughter with a softer expression. Well, Neva, he said gently. Do you still want to fly with me, or do you want to return to your seat? Nevaeh met her father's steady eyes. The crowd was watching. Cameras were rolling. But in that moment, she saw only her father's faith in her. She squared her shoulders. I want my seat back, she said clearly. Solomon nodded with a proud smile. Then, that's what you'll have. As they moved toward the jet bridge leading back to Flight 416, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers turned into murmurs of respect. The crowd parted with reverence. Nevaeh stepped onto the plane again, the cabin silent. All eyes were on her, but this time the look was different. It was awe, respect, and, for some, quiet shame. The man who had told her to move was looking down at his shoes. The couple across the aisle appeared as if they had seen a ghost. Nevaeh walked to seat 2A and sat down. It wasn't just a seat anymore. It was a throne she had fought for and won. Through the window, she glimpsed her father speaking quietly with Captain Rhodes. A nod, a small smile. Then Solomon turned and walked away. The Midnight Halo's engines began to roar to life on the distant runway. The obstacle that had blocked the sky was moving again. But the impact of its presence lingered. A message had been sent, and it would echo for a long time. The engines of Flight 416 began to hum once more, but the cabin wasn't ready to settle. It felt as though the air had changed, heavier and yet more reverent. The passengers who had once glanced past Nevaeh Carter now sat in silence, eyes averted or focused on nothing at all. She could feel their shame, but she wasn't interested in punishing them. She was reclaiming something more important than their approval. She was reclaiming her place. The new flight attendant, a young man with kind eyes and calm hands, offered Nevaeh a bottle of water the moment she settled back into seat 2A. Welcome aboard again, Miss Carter, he said softly. Let me know if you need anything. Nevaeh nodded. Thank you. She placed her sketchbook on her lap again, hands hovering over the cover. She hadn't opened it since Darla first questioned her. Her fingers brushed the edge gently, like testing if it was safe again to let herself feel something. Captain Ethan Rhodes' voice came over the intercom, steady but carrying a weight beneath the words. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. We apologize for the delay. We've had a situation that required direct attention, and we're now preparing for departure. On behalf of Skyreach Airlines and my crew, I'd like to personally thank all passengers for their understanding." There was a pause, a deliberate one. "I'd also like to welcome Miss Nevaeh Carter back to seat 2A, where she has every right to be." The cabin stayed silent, but the tension cracked just slightly. A few people looked over. Others shifted in their seats. No one spoke. Nevaeh felt her throat tighten. She pressed her fingers to her lips and breathed out slowly through her nose. Captain Rhodes had said it out loud, not just to her, to the entire plane. She wasn't imagining it. She wasn't oversensitive. She had been wronged, and someone had finally named it through the window. The midnight halo was now clearing the runway. Its sleek body rolled smoothly across the tarmac, escorted by two airport security vehicles like ceremonial guards. Her father had made his point, and now he was letting the world move again. The gesture struck her differently now. He could have just flown her home. He could have made calls, filed lawsuits, pulled strings. Instead, he came. In person, with presence. Not just power. Because when the world tries to shrink you, sometimes the most radical act is simply to stand beside the person they tried to erase. Nevaeh opened her sketchbook. The page she'd left blank earlier now welcomed her pencil like a familiar friend. She began to sketch the moment the jet descended. The wide stretch of runway, the glint of sun off its matte black wings, the storm of airport lights in its wake. But most of all, she tried to capture that stillness, that bold, unwavering stillness her father had brought with him, like gravity tethering a scattered sky. As the plane began to taxi again, Nevaeh felt something shift inside her chest. Not relief, not triumph, just clarity. She hadn't imagined it. She hadn't overreacted. She had been targeted, and she had stood her ground. She glanced across the aisle at the woman who had once whispered something into her husband's ear as Nevaeh was being questioned. The woman wouldn't meet her eyes now. Neither would the man in business class who had muttered, "Just move." Their silence this time felt different. This time, it was loaded with consequence. A flight attendant walked past and paused. "Would you like something to drink? Miss Carter, we have orange juice, ginger ale, tea, ginger ale." "Please," Nevaeh said. She didn't usually like it, but she felt like claiming something small, something familiar, a drink she had been denied not long ago. As the plane lined up once again on the departure runway, Captain Rhodes came back on the intercom. "Flight crew, prepare for takeoff." The lights dimmed slightly. The engine pitch rose. Nevaeh placed her sketchbook on her lap and buckled her seatbelt. This was the moment she had imagined earlier, the one that had felt so peaceful before it had been stolen. But now, that peace was returning, and this time, it had been earned. The wheels lifted off the ground. The cabin tilted gently backward. The world below shrank, and the sky, finally, accepted her without question. For a few moments, Nevaeh watched the horizon rise and fall like a breath. Dallas faded behind them in shades of gold and steel blue. She leaned back into her seat. For the first time that day, her muscles relaxed. No one was staring anymore. No one questioned her now. They had seen the cost of doing so, at cruising altitude. Captain Rhodes made another announcement. He spoke not as a captain, but as a man trying to rebuild trust in the very space that had betrayed it. "Miss Carter," he said, On behalf of our entire crew, I offer my personal apology for the way you were treated. We are taking this incident seriously, not as an isolated event, but as a lesson we must carry forward." Neva closed her eyes. She didn't need fanfare. She didn't need applause. She needed acknowledgement. And now, finally, she had it. She opened her eyes again and returned to her drawing. As she sketched, her pencil darkened the shadows of the runway, sharpened the edges of the jet. She added soft strokes for her father's coat in the wind, the glow of terminal lights behind him. She added no faces in the crowd. They weren't the story. Only the silence they had broken remained. Across the aisle, a young girl no older than 10 leaned forward to peek at Nevia's sketchbook. Her mother whispered for her to sit back. Nevia smiled gently and turned the book slightly so the girl could see. The child grinned. "That's your dad's plane, isn't it?" Nevia nodded. "Yeah, it is. He's really cool." Nevia laughed softly. "He's everything," she said. The flight continued on, quiet and uneventful. Nevia tucked her sketchbook into her backpack, pulled out a novel, and leaned into the soft hum of the sky. For the first time in hours, she was just a passenger again. No eyes on her, no whispers behind her back, just pages and clouds and the slow, soothing rhythm of forward motion. Justice hadn't come with sirens or shouting. It had come with calm, with a plane stopped on a runway, with a father who would not allow his daughter to be erased. By the time Flight 416 crossed over the Atlantic, the chaos Nevia Carter had left behind on the tarmac had begun rippling across social media, news feeds, and private corporate channels. But up in the sky, cruising at 39,000 feet, all of that felt far away. The cabin lights were dimmed. Most passengers were either asleep, dozing with headphones in, or pretending to be lost in the movie options. Nevia stared out the window at a world that was now quiet, stretched in blues and stars and darkness. She could barely see the edge of the plane's wing slicing the air, glowing faintly with navigation lights. Her fingers toyed with the corner of her sketchbook. There was something sacred about this part of the flight. No service carts, no overhead announcements, just hums and breath and silence. For the first time since she boarded, she allowed herself to close her eyes. She expected her mind to keep racing, to go back over every cruel word, every glance that weighed too heavy. But instead, something new started to settle in, a sense of presence, of survival, of clarity. She hadn't imagined what happened. It had happened, and she hadn't broken under it. She hadn't just survived. She had made them stop and look, not because she shouted louder than anyone else, but because she didn't move. Her father had taught her that. From the time she was small, he reminded her that their very presence was protest, that stillness, when wielded with intention, could thunder louder than outrage, that there were moments when the most powerful thing you could do was stay seated. She smiled a little to herself. Seat 2A. It wasn't about the seat. It never had been. It was about who they thought was allowed to sit there, and who they thought they could remove quietly. Nevia opened her sketchbook again. This time, she turned to a blank page and wrote across the top, Flight 416, the seat they couldn't take. Her pencil danced across the page. This time, she didn't sketch the plane. She sketched the feeling. A black girl in a first-class seat, hoodie draped around her shoulders like armor, eyes soft but unyielding. Behind her, a terminal faded like noise. Ahead of her, sky stretched wide and forgiving. She shaded in her own face, last, not the exact likeness, just the emotion. Then, as she was finishing, she heard a quiet voice from across the aisle. "Is that you?" Nevia glanced up. It was the same older woman who had looked at her earlier with something between suspicion and apology. Her voice was different now, quieter, hesitant. "Yes," Nevaeh said calmly. The woman leaned closer. "I just wanted to say I saw what happened, and I should have spoken up." Nevaeh didn't respond right away. The woman pressed on, perhaps sensing the need to explain herself. "I wasn't sure if it was my place," she said, "but watching your father come for you, I realized that staying silent is how it keeps happening." Nevaeh tilted her head slightly. "That's true," she said softly. The woman looked ashamed. "I'm sorry," she said. Nevaeh nodded, accepting the apology without softness, but also without cruelty. "Thank you for saying that," she replied. The woman sat back in her seat. Nevaeh turned back to the window. She didn't need their guilt. What she needed was to feel the sky recognize her again. And it did. Somewhere over Iceland, the captain came over the intercom again. "Folks, we'll begin our descent into Oslo shortly. Local time is just after 7 in the morning. Temperature is 32 degrees Fahrenheit. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival." As the flight attendants moved through the cabin, Nevaeh watched them carefully. The man who had replaced Darla offered her a gentle smile and made sure she had everything she needed for landing. He didn't speak unnecessarily. He didn't perform apology. He simply treated her like everyone else, which, in truth, was all she ever wanted. As the plane began its descent, Nevaeh braced herself for the return to ground. The landing felt symbolic, not just because it marked the end of a long flight, but because it marked the beginning of something else. A moment that couldn't be erased or buried. As the wheels touched down and the reverse thrusters roared, Nevaeh felt her body push gently against the seat. But her mind didn't drift. She stayed anchored in herself. By the time the plane taxied to the gate, the first rays of the Norwegian sun were beginning to pierce the edges of the sky. It painted the snowy tarmac in soft amber light. Passengers stood slowly, gathering their things. The usual post-flight chaos resumed, but Nevaeh stayed seated for a few moments longer. The flight attendant approached her. "Miss Carter, we'd be happy to escort you off the plane first, if you prefer." She shook her head. "No need. I'll leave with everyone else." When the rows ahead of her began filing out, Nevaeh finally stood and grabbed her backpack. She took one last look at seat 2A before turning toward the exit. As she reached the front of the plane, Captain Rhodes stood waiting. He extended his hand. She paused, then took it. "I don't expect you to forgive what happened," he said quietly. "But I hope you'll remember that some of us want to do better." Nevaeh met his eyes. "I'll remember who showed up," she said. He nodded slowly. Outside, the air was crisp and biting. Nevaeh pulled her hood over her head as she stepped down onto the jet bridge. Just beyond the gate, a young woman in a tailored coat was waiting with a sign, "Carter." She smiled as Nevaeh approached. "Miss Nevaeh, I'm Sina. Mr. Carter asked me to meet you. Your driver is just outside." Nevaeh followed her through the terminal, the floor echoing softly beneath her boots. On the drive to her aunt's house, Nevaeh leaned her head against the window. Snow flurries drifted past, melting against the glass. She thought about the sky, about her seat, about how power had touched down on the tarmac, not in anger, but in precision, not with rage, but with grace. She pulled out her sketchbook again and added the last detail to her drawing. Above the plane, in careful script, she wrote, "This is what love on final approach looks like." The moment Nevaeh Carter stepped into her Aunt Layla's living room, the world caught up with her. She hadn't even taken off her coat when her phone began buzzing in short. Sharp bursts, notifications piling on top of each other like dominoes falling. At first, she thought maybe it was just her friends checking in. But when her aunt turned up the TV and the screen filled with her father's face, she realized it was something else entirely. Breaking news this morning. The anchor was saying a private jet owned by billionaire Solomon Carter landed without clearance on a live runway yesterday at Dallas-Fort Worth International, blocking all departing flights for nearly 90 minutes. The reason his daughter, 17-year-old Nevia Carter, was forcibly removed from a first-class seat despite having a valid boarding pass. Sources say the incident was racially motivated. Nevia stood frozen in front of the screen, her bag still hanging off one shoulder. Her father wasn't just in the news, he had become the news. The footage played next shaky cell phone video of the midnight halo descending like a shadow over the runway, then slowing to a full stop, refusing to move. Another clip showed him standing beside Nevia in the terminal, calm but unshakable, addressing airline officials. Beneath it, a chyron scrolled "Father shuts down runway for daughter corporate fallout looms for Skyreach Airlines." Aunt Layla clicked off the screen and turned to her. "Baby girl," she said softly, "you've just made history." Nevia didn't feel like history. She felt exhausted. Her shoulders ached. Her voice had been silent for hours, her thoughts echoing louder than anything she could say out loud. "I didn't mean for all of this," she whispered. Her aunt walked over and wrapped her in a hug. "You didn't have to mean it," she said. "It was meant to happen." Nevia closed her eyes against the warmth of her aunt's arms. She hadn't realized how tightly she'd been holding herself until that moment, later that afternoon, while she sat curled up on the window bench with tea in her hands. Solomon called. His voice was calm, but tired. "Hey, Sky Girl," he said. Nevia smiled faintly at the nickname. "Hey, Runway King." He chuckled quietly. "You all right? I think so," she said. "There's just a lot." "I know. We don't have to fix it all right now." There was a long pause, the kind where breathing says more than words. Then he added, "But I wanted you to hear it from me before you see it online." She straightened a little. "What they've put Darla Whitmore on administrative leave pending termination. The airline made a public statement a few hours ago. They're launching an internal investigation, retraining all flight staff. And get this, they've offered you a personal apology from the CEO. Nevia blinked. "The CEO, yup. Statement will be live by morning." "You changed something, Nevia," without even trying to. Her stomach turned. She hadn't asked for that. She hadn't wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to fly without being treated like a question mark. "What if I don't want to be part of their campaign?" she asked. "You don't have to be," Solomon said gently. "You don't owe them a photo op. You don't owe anyone anything." Nevia breathed out slowly. She sipped her tea. "Thanks for stopping the world," she said softly. "I didn't stop it," he replied. "I just made it look at you." That night, her story made the front page of every major U.S. news outlet. Editorials ran under headlines like "The Girl in Seat 2A" and "Runway Reckoning." Some praised Solomon for using his influence for good. Others criticized him for disrupting air traffic. Nevia didn't read the comments. She only checked her messages when her friend Ava sent a voice note. "You're literally a legend," Ava said, her voice giddy with awe. "Everyone's talking about you. You're trending in like 5 countries. There's even fan art. Girl, fan art." Nevia wasn't sure how to feel. It felt surreal, like watching someone else's life go viral. She clicked open her inbox. Hundreds of unread messages, some from journalists, some from civil rights organizations, and some from strangers' parents, teachers, Other black girls, each message like a small lantern lit in the dark. One caught her attention. A short email from a woman named Monique. I was kicked off a flight in 1997 for not cooperating. Your story reopened that wound, but it also helped it breathe. Thank you for not shrinking. Thank you for staying in your seat. Nevaeh read the message 3 times before closing her laptop. She lay in bed that night, listening to snowfall outside the window. There was a kind of peace in that sound, a hush between what had happened and what might come next. But sleep didn't come easily. Instead, memories replayed in loops the flight attendant's voice, the moment she stood frozen near the boarding door, the way her father had looked walking across the tarmac like a storm. And beneath it all, something strange and sharp had begun to grow. Not fear, not pride, conviction, a sense that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. She didn't want to be a face in a campaign. She wanted to tell her story her way. So the next morning, she opened her sketchbook and began to draw a new image. A single girl in a vast terminal, standing still while everyone rushed around her in blur. She added soft pencil lines for security cameras overhead. Then she drew herself hoodie on, shoulders square, eyes forward. Beneath it, she wrote in bold strokes, they never expected her to stay seated. By the end of the week, the photo of Nevaeh Carter sitting in seat 2A had become one of the most shared images on the internet. Someone had captured the moment she stared out the window mid-flight, her sketchbook open on her lap and her face turned slightly toward the light. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't posed. It was quiet and real, and it struck something deep in people. There was no fury in the image, just presence. Solomon called her from a boardroom in New York, his voice low and a little amused. "You're on the cover of Time," he said. Nevaeh nearly dropped her phone. What special issue? The new faces of resistance. Your name's in the headline. She sat back on her bed, stunned. I didn't do anything. Oh, you stayed in your seat. Never, he said. Sometimes that's everything. The magazine had chosen not to show the footage of her removal. They didn't need to. The image of her in 2A said more than confrontation ever could. The story painted her as emblematic of a new kind of protest, one rooted not in shouting or spectacle, but in stillness. It quoted her drawing titles, her words to Captain Rhodes, her quiet refusal to be erased. It called her a calm that made the world uncomfortable. Nevaeh sat with that sentence for a long time. Later that day, a message came from Skyreach Airlines. Not a formal one this time, but a personal letter from the CEO, Nora Levin. It began with acknowledgement, not excuses. Dear Miss Carter, I've spent the past 4 days reading every detail of your story and watching every frame of video I could find, not as a CEO, but as a mother. I saw my daughter in you, and I saw myself in the silence that followed. I am deeply sorry, not just for what happened to you, but for every unspoken moment we've allowed to pass unchecked in this industry. Nevaeh reread that part twice. It wasn't perfect, but it felt like something real. The letter went on to offer a private meeting, a scholarship to any aviation-related program she might consider, and the chance to serve on a new advisory board for young flyers' rights. Nevaeh didn't know how to respond. She didn't want to be anyone's token, but she also didn't want to walk away from a door she might hold open for someone else. So she wrote back, "Thank you for your apology. I accept it, not for closure, but for responsibility. I don't want to be a symbol. I want to be a voice." Let's talk about how to make that real. That same evening, she posted a new sketch to her online portfolio. It showed a row of airline seats, empty, with only one filled. In that seat sat a girl, knees tucked beneath her, sketchbook in hand. and a caption above that read, "Sometimes all we ask is to fly without being made small." It went viral within hours. Suddenly, Nevia's inbox overflowed with speaking invitations, college forums, civil rights panels, even a TEDx proposal. But she turned most of them down. She didn't want a spotlight. She wanted direction, and she found it in the messages she received from other young people. A 16-year-old boy from Chicago wrote, "My school tried to suspend me for wearing a hoodie in class after your story. I pushed back and they changed the policy." A girl in South Africa sent a voice note saying, "They made me sit in the back during our class photo. I used to think that was just normal. Not anymore." Nevea began responding to each message one by one, not because she felt obligated, but because each one reminded her that her story was not just hers anymore. It was theirs too. And as that community grew, something else began to take shape. Not a brand, not a movement, a studio. Her art teacher at Northview had once told her, "When the world won't give you space, draw your own." So she did. She launched a small online collective called Cabin Press. It was a virtual gallery space for young artists of color who had felt erased, questioned, or dismissed. She posted weekly prompts: draw the moment you felt most invisible, draw the seat you deserved, draw your runway. Within weeks, over 500 entries had come in from around the world. One drawing showed a young boy walking confidently through airport security with angel wings on his back. Another featured a girl clinging to a window seat, her body dissolving into clouds. Every piece carried the echo of something Nevea understood deeply: the need to be seen. She didn't post her own work often. When she did, it was subtle. A profile sketch, a half-finished airport terminal, her father's coat, drawn from memory, folded across a chair. Each image landed like a whisper in a world full of noise. One day, she received a package from the Skyreach headquarters. It was wrapped in plain brown paper, no logo, no pomp. Inside was a replica of her original boarding pass, mounted in a clear glass frame. It simply read, "Neva Carter Flight 416 Seat 2. Status confirmed. No embellishments, just the truth." She placed it beside her window, where the morning light would pass through it. Sometimes she'd wake up and watch the glass catch the sun, a prism dancing on her wall. She never let it make her proud. Only present. That same week, Solomon emailed her an article. It was a report showing that multiple airlines had quietly begun updating their training modules on implicit bias in boarding and seating procedures. No press releases, no interviews, just change. "Quiet victory," he wrote. Nevea replied simply, "I'll take it." Oslo wore winter with quiet elegance. The snow fell in gentle sheets, blanketing the cobblestones with a softness that slowed everything down. Nevea Carter had never seen a place quite like it. The air was cold but kind, and the mornings felt like they arrived on tiptoe. She had spent most of the past week in her aunt's attic studio, surrounded by tall windows and the faint smell of oil paints. Layla was a sculptor, thoughtful and slow in both speech and movement, as if every word she spoke was shaped from clay. She never pressed Nevea for answers or asked how she was holding up. Instead, she simply left space for her to exist. Neva filled sketchbooks with faces from the market, shadows of train tracks, and half-drawn airports. Her hands moved with purpose again, not because she owed anyone a story, but because the silence around her gave her space to breathe. Each morning, she walked alone through the quiet streets, passing old bookstores and quiet coffee shops where no one recognized her. She drank bitter cocoa from white ceramic cups and watched people move past without flinching, without staring. For the first time in a long time, She felt like she was simply a person, not a headline, not a symbol, just a girl with a notebook in her bag and snow on her lashes. It was during one of those walks, outside a corner cafe, that her father called. "Hey," he said, his voice warm and worn from long nights. "Hi," she answered, kicking at the snow with her boot. "You sound rested." "I'm not, but I'm quiet." "That's a start." There was a pause on the line, soft and familiar. "Listen," he said finally, "I know this wasn't the trip you imagined." "No," she replied, her voice almost a whisper. "But maybe it's the one I needed." She could hear the smile in his silence. He told her he'd be arriving in Oslo the following day. Not for business, not for headlines, just to walk her to the gate. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't need to. When he stepped off the plane the next afternoon, tall and composed in his dark overcoat, she felt something in her chest loosen. The world still felt heavy, but it was easier to carry when he stood beside her. They spent the evening together at a small gallery Layla had recommended. It was hidden down a narrow street and featured only local artists. The exhibit that night was titled Occupied Spaces. Every piece showed someone reclaiming a place they were told they did not belong. There was one painting that stopped Nevaeh cold. A young girl sat in a wide, empty room, her back straight, hands folded on her lap. Around her were echoes of laughter and judgment, sketched faintly in charcoal. But her face was calm, her eyes forward. It didn't look like Nevaeh, but it felt like her. Solomon stood beside her, quiet as always, his eyes scanning the piece. "She reminds me of you," he said. "She reminds me of who I'm trying to be." Nevaeh replied. That night, back in her aunt's apartment, she began a new piece, not from memory, not from fear, but from intention. It showed a first-class cabin, empty except for one figure. Not herself, not a literal person at all, just presence. A silhouette filled with stars. Beside it, she wrote 3 words, not just passenger. When morning came, it was time to return home. Her father booked them both on the same flight. No private jet this time, no cameras, just 2 passengers and their carry-ons. Still, the boarding agent recognized them and smiled quietly. "Welcome aboard, Miss Carter," the woman said. "We're honored to have you fly with us." Nevaeh nodded politely. This time, no one questioned her ticket. No one asked if she was in the right place. She settled into her seat 2A again, though on a different plane, a different day, and yet, somehow, it still felt sacred. Solomon sat across the aisle in 2B. He glanced at her sketchbook and smiled. "You naming this one too?" She smiled back. "Not yet. I'm waiting to see how it ends." The flight was calm, uneventful, no whispers, no glances, just sky. Halfway through the flight, the attendant passed out meal trays and handed Nevaeh a handwritten note folded beside her drink. It read, "You reminded us all that staying seated can still change the course of a flight." It wasn't signed. She tucked it into her sketchbook without a word. As the plane began its descent into Dallas, Nevaeh leaned her head against the window. She thought of everything that had happened, the boarding, the confrontation, her father stepping onto the runway like a storm cloud wrapped in velvet, the apology, the letters, the sketches, the silence that had followed, deep and echoing, and now, this moment, this return, it didn't feel like an end, more like a turning page. As the wheels touched down, she took a deep breath and exhaled slowly. The air felt warmer, the ground steadier. Beside her, Solomon checked his watch and then looked over. Ready. She nodded. They stood together, collected their things, and walked off the plane without ceremony. No cameras, no speeches, Just two people reclaiming the sky. It had been 2 months since Nevaeh Carter first stepped onto Flight 416. 2 months since she had been questioned, humiliated, then quietly returned to her seat with the whole world watching. In that time, the headlines had changed. The world had moved on. New stories surfaced. New scandals dominated screens. But for Nevaeh, life didn't return to normal. It moved in a different direction entirely. She walked the halls of Northview High with a different kind of stillness. People nodded now when she passed, not with fame or pity, but with quiet recognition. A few even stopped her to say thank you. Some teachers added her art to classroom bulletin boards. Her AP literature teacher invited her to speak during a lesson on quiet protagonists and symbolic resistance. She smiled at the irony. She never told them everything. Not how she froze when she boarded her next flight, heart pounding even though she knew every detail was in order. Not how she sometimes woke in the middle of the night remembering the weight of Darla Whitmore's stare. Not how some days she still wondered whether the world truly changed or whether it simply got louder. But what she did tell them was this: that dignity doesn't require permission. That presence is power. That sometimes the strongest protest is stillness. Seatbelt fastened. Eyes forward. She said these things without raising her voice, and yet the classroom always fell silent when she spoke. At home, Solomon had changed too. He was still the measured executive, still precise and calm. But now, there was a softness in him when they talked, a willingness to listen more and explain less. He had begun attending community panels on aviation bias, quietly funding a fellowship for students interested in equity policy and transportation. He never mentioned it in interviews. He never made a press release. He said, "Some things don't need attention. They need action." Nevaeh believed him. Cabin Press, her small online art collective, had grown beyond what she imagined. Over 2,000 young people had contributed. Their stories came in sketches, watercolor portraits, digital animations. One boy submitted a short film based on her flight. A girl from Tokyo sent in a single pencil line that curved like a wing in stormlight. Nevaeh showcased every piece. She answered every email she could, not because she was trying to be a leader, but because she remembered what it felt like to wonder if you were alone in your experience. One Friday afternoon, as snow began to fall again in Dallas, Nevaeh sat by her bedroom window with her sketchbook open, reflecting on everything. She turned to a blank page and started drawing a new image, the first in weeks. It was a wide frame of an airport runway at dusk. At the center sat 2 planes, one commercial, one private. Behind them, the terminal windows glowed. Inside, a girl stood with a backpack, watching the sky. The drawing was titled Final Approach. It wasn't about endings. It was about landing somewhere new. That same weekend, Skyreach Airlines formally announced the Nevaeh Carter Passenger Rights Amendment. It established new anti-discrimination protocols for all domestic flights, required identity-neutral ticket handling procedures, and made staff accountable for escalation protocols involving minors and people of color. They didn't ask Nevaeh to attend the press conference. She wouldn't have gone even if they had. Instead, she posted the policy summary on Cabin Press with a caption that read, "This isn't my victory. It belongs to every passenger who ever stayed quiet because they were scared of being removed for simply existing." The post was shared by authors, artists, activists, and even a few airline employees. 3 days later, her inbox lit up with another message. This time, it wasn't from media or fans. It was from Captain Ethan Rhodes. "Dear Miss Carter, I've flown more than 1,000,000 miles. I've carried athletes, executives, celebrities. But I will never forget the day you stepped back onto Flight 416, the way you sat in 2A, the way you stayed calm when you had every reason not to. You changed me. I wanted you to know I've enrolled in a 2-year training program focused on racial and bias awareness in aviation. I want to do better. I hope that counts for something. With respect." Captain Ethan Rhodes Nevia stared at the message for a long time. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She typed back, "Captain Rhodes, it counts more than you know. Thank you, Nevia." That night, she sat with her father on the back porch. The stars above Dallas flickered faintly through haze. He looked over at her. "You're flying again next week, right?" "Yeah, visiting Ava in New York." He nodded. "You good, I think so," she said, still a little nervous. "You don't have to be brave every time." "Never. Just grounded." She laughed softly. "Grounded is your word. I want to be airborne." He smiled. "You already are." They sat in silence for a while. Then she turned toward him, her voice thoughtful. "Do you ever think it's strange that it took a private jet to remind the world a girl had the right to sit in the seat she paid for?" "I think it's tragic," he said. "But I also think the world listens to what it fears." "And what it fears," he added gently, "is a calm black girl who refuses to leave her seat." Nevaeh nodded. Then she whispered, "Well, let them keep listening." The following morning, she boarded her next flight. It was a smaller plane, with no media attention and no special treatment. She sat in seat 12A, a window seat. She pulled out her sketchbook, turned to a new page, and began to draw clouds. The flight was short, the sky smooth. No one asked her to move. No one asked her to explain. She simply flew. And when the wheels touched down in New York, and the flight attendant smiled at her like any other traveler, Nevaeh smiled back. She was not a passenger anymore. She was the sky. Nevaeh Carter didn't raise her voice. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She just refused to leave her seat. And in that quiet decision, she reminded the world of something far louder than angered dignity. Her story became a spark, not just because her father, Solomon Carter, blocked a runway with his private jet, but because a girl who was supposed to disappear stayed visible, and in doing so, she lit a path for others. But why did it take power, wealth, and the threat of headlines for justice to even get off the ground? Why are stories like Nevaeh's still unfolding in airports, classrooms, and workplaces around the world? We leave this story with more than answers. We leave with a challenge: to listen, to believe, to confront the everyday ways we silence, profile, and exclude without even realizing it. Nevaeh's journey is not over, and neither is ours. The seat you give up might be the truth you lose. The sky, it turns out, is not neutral, and dignity doesn't ask for permission to board. If this story moved you, if Nevaeh's voice echoed something true inside your own, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us tell stories that matter, stories that fight silence with truth, and stories that remind us we all have a seat that no one should take from us. Until next time, stay grounded, stay human, stay watching.